Hi all. So the topic for this week is new imperialism. And new imperialism, although it may sound funny, is really sort of a new approach to what it meant to get colonies. In particular, this arises in the mid-1800s, and it's different largely from the colonialism that we discussed earlier, in particular looking at things like Spain and Portugal and the New World. Here in New Imperialism, what we're largely talking about is industrialized Europe, so after the Industrial Revolution of the earlier phase in the 17th to the 1800s, and looking at imperialism particularly in Africa and Asia. Now, Europe goes through the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1700s into the 1800s, and this puts them way ahead in terms of economic success, but also in terms of domination in other parts of the world. You know, one of the things that's important to see here is it's not that Europe could not or did not want to conquer Africa and Asia. They just could not, right? They didn't have the success or tactics or strategy or really even the means. But now with the Industrial Revolution, steamships, boats, better guns, they could in fact get into the heart of Africa. Now, that being said, there are other motivators as well, not just the rise of this need or ability to. There's also there is a huge need, right? The Industrial Revolution really causes a need for new resources, coal, and others, other items that Europe just can't always provide. So because of this, Europe really wants to get more goods, more access to goods. And that's why Africa and Asia become so central to European intervention. Now, there's also a political need here. Italy and Germany unify into nations in the late 1800s. Italy and Germany, become countries in the 1860s and 1870s. And this destabilizes the balance of power in Europe, particularly when we talk about places like Britain and France. So there's this desire to outpace and outperform the others. So in the 1800s, Britain and France want to continue to be better than those places. So the route to that is colonies. There's also another desire here, and that is a cultural desire. One of the things that emerges as well is this idea that the races in Africa and the races in Asia are not as culturally fit as the Europeans are. And there's this idea of social Darwinism, this idea that countries and people need to be or are more dominant than others. In particular, obviously, this means the white European races are better than the rest. As a result of this, there is a push to spread European culture. This is often titled what we call the white man's burden. Now, the white man's burden, is this idea of making places better, and in particular, making places more, making people more developed. So when you read the poem, The White Man's Burden, there's so much in it. It's really just a great poem for this example. We're talking about the ideas of Christianizing. So there's the missionaries are sent. There's also a desire to develop. So they are building roads, railroads, canals. And all of this is part of that desire to just improve these people. Now, I'm making it sound as if it's like for the benefit of Africans or Asians. And that's certainly not the case, right? It's really almost for the benefit of the Europeans, right? If they are more like Europeans, their work ethic will be better. And the Europeans can capitalize on that more. Or their strategies and abilities will be better, which will ultimately help the Europeans more. So, all of this is part of that desire and that motivation to colonialization. And this is probably best exemplified in the Berlin Conference of 1884. Now, the Berlin Conference of 1884 is a meeting where Africa is ultimately divided up among the European powers. At this meeting in Berlin, there is a push to obviously divide up Europe so that divide up Africa so that the Europeans have the most access to it. And it is divided among these 7 European powers that are listed on the board, on the screen. Now, no Africans are present at this meeting. No Africans are consulted about putting different groups together. So what we have is, for the next 100 or so years, competition between the two tribes is limited because everybody hates the Europeans. And then when the Europeans finally leave in the 1960s, there's a big push of sort of hatred towards the many different African tribes that had now been put together. Now, the thing that I would really want everybody to sort of understand here is Africa provided a great source of wealth for Europeans. Europeans needed new resources. The Industrial Revolution was gobbling up all of the goods of Europe. Timber was being consumed at great numbers. Oil was being consumed at great numbers. And the Europeans needed more access to that. So in the 1800s, Africa offers that opportunity. And Africa provides just a great wealth. I mean, we have the rainforests of the middle part of Africa that provide the lumber and the timber for the Europeans. We have oil in North Africa. And a product that will become important is, particularly when we talk about the lubrication of machinery, is palm oil from up in northwest Africa. And then obviously there's also wealth, right? Diamonds and gold, particularly in South Africa, in terms of people like Cecil Rhodes and others. So when we talk about the motivation for imperialism, resources are really at the forefront. Europeans need access to the resources. Additionally, Europeans need places to sell these goods. And, a great example of this is in India. The European, particularly the British get control over India. The British East India Company gets control over it in the 1500s. But it's not until the 1700s that Britain really gets a firm control of it, 1757. And then in the 1800s, the British government takes over after major problems between the British East India Company and the local elites in India. So the British government gets control over it, and they're cultivating cotton, taking the cotton, bringing it back to Britain, to places like Manchester and Liverpool, spinning it into cloth. The cloth is then made into saris and clothing, and then it's brought back to India to sell the goods. Now, that, I think, illustrates a great point here. And that point is that although, the British are making these products, the British are also selling these products back to the people that are making the raw material. And so you have this idea of markets. So you have the idea of self-sufficiency, needing the resources, but also markets, where to sell the goods. Now, if you couple that with the idea of the cultural motives, you've got this great picture of why imperialism happens in this way in the 1800s. There are great examples of this. There are many examples of the different products that are being bought and sold here, but I think the best example that I would like to sort of illustrate here is in South Africa. South Africa is a great example because it's dominated by this guy named Cecil Rhodes. He's a mining entrepreneur. He founds the De Beers Diamond Company, and he's really extracting huge amounts of resources for the British Empire. And that is really because in the 1860s and 1880s, diamonds and gold are found here, and this new technology allows the British to get in and dominate the mines and the goods. Cecil Rhodes is probably most famous for his idea of connecting Cape Town to Cairo, and this is a pretty famous picture of him at the time. So imperialism, I think, has a very mixed, is very controversial, because imperialism hinges on this idea of British, French, German exploitation, Dutch exploitations, but it also involves, part of, a cost benefit, and that is the idea that the British and the French and the Germans also helped to develop these places, in terms of building railroads and roads and canals. So imperialism starts because of resources, cultural motives, and markets, but it turns into other things as well.